This right here is the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus written by Ludwig Wittgenstein, where he essentially banished himself away from the rest of society into a little cabin somewhere in Norway to write this book. And this book right here went on to be one of the most exciting pieces of philosophical works of the 20th century, and it completely changed the field. Now, there are also numerous stories out there about this archetypical image of the isolated, tortured genius. Now, in this video, I want to shed some light onto this topic and to share some of my personal perspectives on this very topic. Now, to counter the example of Wittgenstein's extreme isolation, here is another piece of literature that was birthed out of very, very different conditions. One of my favorite pieces of French literature was a Book of Maxims by La Rochefoucauld. The book wasn't birthed out of some French monastery. It was actually birthed out of a very noisy salon. La Rochefoucauld sat around all these intellectuals, and he sat around all these people, and he was trying to win their attention. Because in such a noisy environment, people weren't going to tolerate boring professor talks. People were not up for some long-winded discussions on ethics, metaphysics. So it was in this environment had La Rochefoucauld mastered the art of the maxim, where he would write these pithy statements that captured the totality of the audience's attention. And as a result, he ended up with all these maxims, which if you collect them into a book, it's barely 60 pages long. Nevertheless, this book went on to have a significant impact on French literature. So 2 books birthed out of very different conditions. And here's kind of my take on this entire subject. You, as an artist, you've got a pretty special role to play. Art without the influence of life is just an empty shell, and life without art is just a tragedy. So therefore, you somehow want to develop a very funny relationship with society and culture and the crowd. You don't want to be lost in the crowd, but you don't want to be an alien to the crowd either. So your relationship with culture is sort of like in and out, where you would essentially gather what you need from the crowd and just bugger out of there as soon as possible. I do agree that true creativity actually requires a lot of depth. So you do need certain periods of isolation for you to actually work on the craft. Kind of like a stand-up comedian. When he's writing the thing, when he's writing the jokes, he is absolutely focused. He is locked away from the crowd. He's working on his jokes, his deliveries. But when he's actually performing, that's when he dips himself back into the crowd and to seek feedback. Throughout this in and out process, can art really have a real impact on people? On one hand, the isolated genius runs the risk of creating something that no one cares about. And on the other hand, the con artist, or someone that only cares about what the crowd thinks, might produce something that's just entirely banal and unimportant. The real artist here can navigate through these 2 ends of extremes and to come up with something that's both useful for the crowd and that's also very much true to his own values and true to his own creative voice. And of course, you can find many other writers that also follow this set of guidelines for being a original creative. One of my favorite writers of all time, Jack Kerouac, went on the road with Neil Cassidy, where they just toured around America. Very exciting. Essentially, he was lost in the actions. But after that entire exciting road trip, he had to come back to his desk, to his typewriter, where he typed out on the road in 3 weeks in complete isolation. So the literature itself is actually an embodiment of 2 ends of the pole. There's the exciting road trip stuff and there's the isolated writing stuff. If you combine them together, you have this piece of art that you've created. So yes, artists do occupy a really, really special place in society where they're not exactly averse to society, but at the same time, they have this ability to isolate themselves away from society if they need to work on something original. And I really do think that's a healthier attitude to view creative endeavors with. So many people fall into this trap of the isolated genius where they think their work is just the best without actually getting feedback from the outer world. Without realizing that their work is partly influenced by life, they're denying a real chunk of authenticity. And with that lack of authenticity, their art just wouldn't really be that exciting. So, in conclusion, if you are a creative person in the 21st century, you want to develop a really special relationship with society where you are dipping in and out of culture, where you are not exactly immersed in a crowd, but you're not averse to the crowd either. Be a roamer, be a vagabond, be whatever. Be someone that doesn't have a stable anchor, and from that place, go create something amazing. So that's all I have for this week. If you are interested in more content from me, be sure to sign up to the newsletter. And if you want to support this project, I'd really appreciate it if you check out my Patreon account. I post exclusive Patreon book reviews in audio form, which is kind of like a podcast thing that I'm currently doing on my Patreon page. So if that's something you're into, be sure to go and check it out. Anyway, RC Waldun here, and I'll be signing off right now.